Greetings and welcome to our daily Devo for Tuesday, the 12th of December. Today, we had a lesson on prayer yesterday. Today, our devotion is a lesson on authority. Passages cited will be from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The verse that's printed for us today is Matthew 21:23. By what authority are you doing these things? They asked Jesus. And who gave you this authority? I'm sure it was said in a very uppity kind of way. It had to stop. The whispered stories about Jesus' miracles, the crowds calling for Jesus' coronation, the disruption of the temple markets, it all had to stop. And so, a self-important group approached Jesus. I like that. A self-important group approached Jesus as he taught in the temple courts. There, they were on a power trip and presumed Jesus would be cowed by their presence and intimidated by their authority. The group consisted of aristocratic priests or Sadducees, the senior scholars of the Pharisees, called the teachers of the law, and other well-to-do, influential leaders within the Sanhedrin. This pretentious group confronted Jesus with a pair of questions. They cared little about the answers. Their goal was to intimidate Jesus, bullying him into backing down. They got something quite different than they expected. Jesus was on the offensive. He replied to their questions with one of his own, a question that put the spotlight on how these esteemed elite dealt with John the Baptist. Like Jesus, John presented as a teacher who was uncredentialed by the Jerusalem school system. Did they regard John as an authorized teacher of the faith? The Jewish leaders stepped to the side, wringing their hands over the dilemma. John had been executed by Herod years earlier. Yet his case remained a hot topic these Jewish leaders deftly avoided, because though uncredentialed, John was extremely popular. Fearing an uprising against them, the pious elite returned to Jesus with an answer. And their non-answer accomplished exactly what Jesus intended. It exposed that their bravado was a sham. It was a sham. True to the agreement, Jesus refused to answer their initial set of questions. That is not because he lacked an answer. Ironically, Jesus could have pointed them to the moment John baptized him in the Jordan River, a moment when his authority from heaven was on full display in Matthew 3:16 and 17. But Jesus' refusal to answer spoke more directly to the point he was making. Their intimidation had failed. Jesus gave them no answer because none was owed. And in doing so, he exposed the weakness of those who claimed to have authority over him. Religious leaders, they were Jesus' biggest enemies. We think Rome, we think Pilate, we think those pagan forces. But in reality, the instigators in all of the opposition to Jesus, all of the negative talk that went around originated with them. They bribed, they lied, they were phonies. Jesus repeatedly will call them out, and he'll call them what they are, hypocrites. Hypocrites is actually a word taken from Greek theater for actor. It's somebody who's this, who pretends to be somebody else, which we appreciate when somebody does it well in the movies. We don't appreciate it so much when somebody does it in real life. Do their words and their lives match up. Jesus called them on the carpet one day for their praying, for their donating, and for their fasting, and he says they're only doing it for show. They want your applause, and they get it, but they're not getting God's. God's not impressed. That is a problem down through all of history with every religion. We hear that said about Islam these days, that those who are warlike, those who are plotting things, we hear from other Muslims, they're not really living the Quran the way they ought to. And we say the same thing about Christians who are angry, who are violent, who plot and do things. Well, they're not really living out the Lord's way. They're not living out the scriptures. I don't care what religion you might find throughout history, there's always somebody who looks like it, but aren't. And that was, those are the enemies Jesus faced most often. Most often. I find it interesting, and it just struck me this past year preparing sermons during the time of Easter. Of all the people Jesus who presented as his enemies, let's put it that way. Of all those people, Pharisees, Romans alike, he had the most interesting conversation with Pilate. Pilate seemed to be a real seeker. What exactly is truth? I've been trying to figure that out. He wants to know. He's interested in this Jesus. Now his understanding's going to be fogged up, clouded up because of what he's hearing from the Pharisees, Sadducees, who are telling him lies, who are saying he's going to, if people follow him, Rome will come back here with more legions and they'll take away your position and they'll destroy things. Fake news. I guess it's not original. Scare tactics. I guess it's not original. But in the face of all of that, this lesson on authority, Jesus knew where his authority came from. And he wasn't going to be bullied. And he wasn't going to act like, I'm better than you. My authority comes from heaven. Yours only comes from Rome. He knows that it's a useless argument to get into. And that is one of the revelations anybody who gets on social media quickly finds out. You are not going to change somebody's already made up mind, especially when it's aimed in the negative. Jesus faced it. Leaders face it. So we need to be confident of whose we are and not allow those who claim to know better, claim to be more important, bully us. Just stay the course. Follow Jesus. Our authority comes from him. As he says before he leaves to the disciples, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, he says. Now go, and I will be with you. What does that mean? It means his authority goes with us also. The authority to preach the word, the authority to share the gospel, the authority to be his representative wherever we go and whatever we do. Authority. Spiritual authority that we use in a humble way. In a humble way, not a forceful way. Just as Jesus used his in a humble way. Blessings to you today on this Tuesday.